morning, everyone. My name is Drew Embury, and welcome to our Knowledge Education Series event, When Disaster Strikes, what you need to know about covering your technology assets. We found that there's a lot happening in the technology industry, and it can be overwhelming to business people. So we hope these sessions can bring some clarity to some of the different technology buzzwords that are being used in the industry today. My name is Drew Embury, and I'm a partner here at P&L Technology. My role is to set the technical direction for our company and our clients and help you get the most out of your technology investment. I'm really excited for this topic today, and we've got some pretty strong attendance numbers, which I think really speaks to the popularity and relevance of this topic. So here's an overview of how this will work today. This is a listen-only event, and it will be recorded. We know everyone is busy, and we're going to commit to a 30-minute maximum time for this event. We will divide up the 30 minutes into about 20 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for question and answer at the end. If you have questions, please use the chat function to send them in, and we will save time at the end to address as many as we can. Following the session, we'll introduce our next webinar and some other future topics we hope you will find interesting and learn more about. At the end of this webinar, you will receive an email that will contain a short survey that we hope you will take the time to fill out, as it will assist us in making future sessions more informative. We hope you'll find this session valuable and helpful to your business. When we were putting this topic together, we got a suggestion by a client that we involve also the insurance side of protecting technology assets on this webinar. When we asked around many of our clients and asked them who they were using for their insurance needs, a name kept coming up, and that was Marcotte. So today I'm pleased to introduce Bill Sauer and Dan O'Halloran of Marcotte, who will join us today and provide expert advice on the insurance side of this discussion. Welcome, guys.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right. So what are we going to cover today? Well, just in the last couple of months, Omaha has experienced a couple of marquee businesses that have experienced a major disaster. So a couple of examples of that might be the M's Fire Pub in the Old Market that destroyed that kind of venerable institution in the Old Market, and the Heafy, Hoffman, Dworak, and Cutler Funeral Home and Chapel around 80th and Center, where both of those businesses were totally destroyed by large out-of-control fires. So imagine being a business owner or a key manager and waking up to this picture, which is a picture of the Heafy home and the firemen trying to extinguish the fire. This story is fairly interesting. One of the owners, Bill Cutler, got a call from the alarm monitoring company that there was a fire sensor going off. And he only lived a few blocks away, so he headed over and kind of actually met the first fire truck that arrived on the scene there. He actually entered the building with permission of the firemen and ended up being driven out by the flames, unfortunately. They actually even had to sound a second alarm and bring a second fire station and associated fire equipment over to completely extinguish the flames, which kind of ravaged for over 5 hours. So, of course, the building was a total loss, including all of their IT equipment. The Heafy organization is actually a client of P&L Technology, which not only gave us a key role in the restoration of their business, but also an inside look at how the process worked. So we received permission from the Heafy folks to share their story today with you, and really the considerable success they had in quickly restoring their technology operations after this really unfortunate event. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, we all think that disasters, that's stuff that happens to other people. And P&L Technology has been in business about 10 years, and I'd love to say that example we just talked about and that you're looking at here on the screen is rare, but we've seen an event like this really almost every year, at least, we've been in business. We've worked with 2 clients who've had a complete loss of their buildings due to fire, not just a small fire, but really a complete loss of the building. We had a client that had a major flood where a water main break, and they had 7 feet of water in their building. We've helped a client that had a lightning strike that really didn't destroy their building, but it fried every piece of electronic equipment, including their computers and servers and really some other equipment they had. And we've even had a client who had their server stolen by a theft after a break-in. So about the only disaster that we've been lucky enough not to have to assist a client with is a tornado, thankfully. So the takeaway is disasters are more common than one might think, which makes it really smart business to think ahead and plan what you might do if this ever happens to you or your business. And of course, the most common disaster, would be a malfunction or a crash of a piece of critical equipment, which really many people often overlook when they talk about disaster planning. So what are we going to cover today is really after the fire is extinguished, what do you do? So we plan to show you exactly what the HEFE organization did, just kind of use that as a case study, as they really had great success in restoring their organization. With the hope maybe you can take away some valuable insight in what to do after a major disaster, or even better, realize maybe if some things that you have in your technology or your planning may have some shortcomings that may prevent a timely restoration. So the day after the fire, so we actually detected that the server went offline about 4 a.m. And me being more of a executive at P&L Technology, I actually heard on the radio on the way in that the HEFE place had a major fire. So I immediately said, "Uh-oh, we sound like we've got a lot of work ahead of us." So kind of the first step that we did is we had some of the HEFE management that arrived at our building to kind of sit down and start this process. And really the first thing we did is create a list of all their technology assets and all of their things they rely on, and made a list of those and then triage those appropriately. So in the case of the HEFE organization, the critical items for them from a business perspective was to keep the funerals and the services running. As you can imagine, the families that were working with them were already grieving and didn't need any other upheaval, if at all possible. So, things like accounting systems and their ongoing sales and those kinds of things were, although they were important, they were less important to the things that were just needed to keep those services running. So what we identified is what they needed was files that were originally on their file server. So the first thing we did was then restore those critical files from the remote data backup system. So that's the next thing I wanted to talk about is the remote data backup technology that they had put into place was really critical at getting this data restored properly. Because the backup was using internet-based technology, it was always off-site. They didn't have tape backups or other things that would have created a lot more slow restoration. And we had a valid backup that ran at 10 p.m. that night before the fire. And then because the fire was at 3 a.m. and there wasn't much work going on between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., practically zero data was lost or at risk there. So the HEFE management then arrived on site at our location with a USB drive, even a little thumb drive will work, and we restored the files they needed to hold the funerals over the next couple of days. So things like bulletins that you would get at a funeral, things like the agenda and all the key names and all that kind of stuff that the funeral directors would need to run an effective service, things like the music that plays, all those things they had stored and teed up and ready to go on their server. So we helped them quickly restore that small number of files that allowed them to keep working on the next couple of days. Another point that was really helpful in this process was their email was already in the cloud, so using Office 365, so it wasn't on any of their local, didn't reside on any of their local IT gear that was restored. So the takeaway from that is all of their email was up and running the whole time. So if an employee had an access to the web just using a web browser, or they had a smartphone or a tablet, that was all they needed to keep in contact with clients and employees throughout this disruption. The next step we did with them is identify some temporary hardware that we could use. So because everything was destroyed, we needed some hardware that they could use for a period of time. And we actually happened to have enough spare hardware to start this restoration. So we identified with the HEFE folks that we could get their file server on a temporary server that we actually had in stock at our office, and we also grabbed 5 laptop computers that we had in stock at our office that would allow us to restore the data and really get some essential or key personnel up and running. So although we wouldn't have 20 or 25 computers like they normally would have, we could at least have some shared computers or some computers for essential staff to use. When I was talking to the Marcotte folks, they mentioned that if your organization doesn't have access to temporary equipment like they did due to their relationship with us, potentially insurance can cover the cost of temporary hardware, emergency overnight shipping, and some of those things. Dan or Bill, do you want to jump in and maybe just talk about how that works real quick?
Yeah, absolutely, Drew. You kind of stole our thunder there. A good electronic data processing policy will include that cost for the temporary hardware, any kind of rental cost. It's real important to look at that policy and know what's in it, because there's really no such thing as a standard electronic data processing policy. So absolutely, though, it's something you can get.
Excellent. Yeah, and if you can imagine, a lot of really fairly in-depth technical work needed to happen, and that could potentially run up a fairly large invoice for an organization that's going through that needs to rent equipment and buy new equipment very quickly and have technical resources working 24 hours a day. So that's one of the main things that Dan mentioned to definitely check in your policy. So yeah, anyway, getting back to the technical work, after we identified that hardware, what we did is we immediately got started on the system or server restore for the HEFI folks. So restoring a server could take 24 hours or more, because really all of the data that they had stored on that needs to be copied back down to that server, which can take 24 hours or more. So we wanted to get started on that right away. Okay, so basically we worked to triage the restoration. We got started on the server restoration on some hardware, and we provided the things that the HEFI folks needed just over the next couple of days to keep their organization running. We then kind of switched gears a little bit into more long-term planning. So after we had the server restored, we identified a physical location where really the displaced employees can work. So in the case of the HEFI organization, they had a few other chapel/office locations around town. So they basically had us set up that temporary server and those temporary PC laptops for all the essential staff then at that location. We then also this was more on their end, but they worked at really identifying a permanent location. So if you have a building that's destroyed, is it possible to rebuild and move back in there while the rebuilding's taking place? Is there another location you can rent temporarily? In the case of the HEFI location, they ended up buying a restaurant that had closed and made plans to renovate that into an even better spot for them to move into. So although HEFI had a great spot for us to temporarily locate, when I've worked with clients in the past that had disaster, we've even set up in the owner's basement before, so the skeleton crew can keep working and really keep the business going while either a temporary or a permanent location is located. The next step we did was really then to work to assess the needs for replacing the destroyed IT gear with new gear. So we met with the HEFI folks and completed the network assessment, and really put a quote together for all new gear that was in line with the requirements of their new building. And then the next step was just order all the new equipment and then schedule the projects for installation, which would then restore the organization really to full capacity as part of the restoration. So that's kind of really at a high level a nutshell of how the HEFI folks walked through their disaster. They kept the business running during the whole ordeal and really had a really good success. So at this point, I'm going to now turn it over to Dan and Bill to discuss some of the insurance considerations for either what to do after a disaster or really checking your policy before a disaster to make sure you're covered.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you very much. This is Dan O'Halloran, and I'm with Marcotte. Those of you that aren't familiar with our firm, we're a full-service agency. We've been in Omaha since 1927. So we do employee benefits, retirement planning, 401k, home auto, individual financial planning, and of course the area we're going to talk about today, commercial property and casualty insurance or business insurance to protect those assets of your business. And Bill's going to jump in here as well. The most important thing when you're looking at an insurance policy, the definitions can be a real important thing to look at. And so we want to talk about how does an insurance policy kind of define what's included in computer equipment. So you'll see a list there and some of the things that might kind of you'd expect to see on the list, and some you may not. You might not think about printers and modems and things of that nature that for insurance purposes are considered computer equipment. A lot of times with our manufacturing clients, the sophisticated equipment that they use can be considered computer equipment as well, and it's important because that's treated differently within an insurance policy than, say, your inventory or desks and chairs and things of that nature. We're going to talk a little bit more about the data on the computer, which is not considered a computer equipment, but we'll get into that kind of as we go forward here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Bill Sauer with Marcotte. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Dedication to sit in on a webinar during St. Pat's. Just to maybe kind of put this in context, why an electronic data processing policy is important. The first thing we want to look at is the standard property policy. And even in the example of Heafy, of the funeral home, if they had not had a standard or an electronic data processing policy, we call it EDP for short, their computer equipment still would have been covered because it was a fire. And when we think about insurance and what triggers insurance coverage, we think about those types of things: fire, theft, wind damage, those types of things. The reason an EDP policy is so important is it will give you some additional coverage for causes of loss that the standard property policy will exclude. So just keep that in mind.
So everybody recognizes this ninja as a computer hacker. So this is the type of loss why you need a specialty policy. When it comes to computer equipment, there's a lot of things that can happen to it that isn't covered on a standard policy, as Bill pointed out. So this is a list of some of the typical exclusions you'll see if you don't have a specialized policy. And so you should work with your broker to make sure that your equipment is covered properly for these types of things, which, as you can see, this list, these are the type of things that can really damage your electronic equipment. The things like the design errors, maintenance errors, programming errors, things of that nature that wouldn't be covered on a standard property policy. So the thing to take away is you really need to know what is and isn't covered and how to best protect that equipment. And really there's a couple of ways you can do it. You need to either add a endorsement to your property policy or write a standalone electronic data policy, and we can talk about that a little bit as we go. Some other exclusions.
Yeah, here's some other, again, these would be exclusions under the standard property policy and why it is important to have an EDP policy where you do get coverage for these causes of loss that you wouldn't get under your typical or standard property policy. So utility services, if for some reason the electrical is shut down, a brownout where you maybe have a certain part of town is shut down without power and then the power flips back on and there's a power surge which can damage your computer equipment. These are things that are excluded as causes of loss under a standard property policy, but you can get these coverages that can be very unique in their ability to damage your computer equipment. You can get these coverages under your EDP policy.
So let's dig into it a little bit, the kind of things that you want to have in your policy. We've talked about the things that are excluded under a standard. So here's the things you want to make sure you're covering and thinking about as you're protecting your business. So business income. I know in the examples that Drew gave with Heafy and with M's Pub, they're obviously going to lose some business income. That can be included just related to an electronic vandalism or a loss to your computer system. Rental income if you're a landlord and that sort of thing, extra expense. One of the things people don't think about, I know that Heafy seemed to get a lot of publicity and there's been obviously much coverage with the M's Pub story, but you can actually use your insurance proceeds to pay for good faith PR to let people know you're back in business, you've survived whatever loss you had that may have made the news, and you're up and running and taking care of their needs. So some of the things that you also need to think about is the cost to restore or replace. Drew, you might want to jump in terms of the value of hardware. We always really lean heavily on experts like Drew on that field in terms of what would it cost to replace those servers that you bought 10 years ago. Sometimes you can get more for less when it comes to computers, but Drew, you can jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly get more for less as far as processing power and capabilities and those types of things. But for 10 years ago, we would typically spend $3,000 to $4,000 on a server, and that's kind of about the same area where we're at today. So although the capabilities have increased significantly, the total cost hasn't changed a ton in our world.
Sounds good. Another important consideration would be even the services of folks like Drew at P&L. They might be running up overtime and things like that when you're in a disaster type situation. So for them to come back in and try to recover data, reprogram, and help you as you kind of get rebuilt, those costs are insurable, and a good EDP policy will have that coverage in there.
And I guess just to back up and put this in context, looking at the example of the Heafy funeral home fire, if they didn't have a computer policy, an EDP policy in place, because it was a fire, their computer equipment would have been covered, loss of income would have been covered. What we're trying to emphasize is if there's a cause of loss, as Dan mentioned, that's typically excluded under a standard property policy, a computer virus, a hacker, those types of things, you're only going to get coverage for your computer equipment and the damage that results from those types of causes of loss if you have an EDP policy in place. So that might get a little confusing, but we just want to emphasize the importance of EDP is it basically gives you coverage for causes of loss that typically are excluded under the standard property policy. But if it's a fire and you've got property coverage, it's the fire that damaged the computer equipment, you'll have coverage under your standard property policy. So just to clarify that. So just some final considerations, risk management, redundancy, contingency planning. That's outside the scope really of just an insurance policy, but you've seen from what Drew talked about with the funeral home, they had good backup plans in place with P&L's assistance. Valuation, we've talked a little bit about that. It's kind of interesting how you value your computer equipment. That's where you probably want the expertise of someone like Drew and his organization to really help you value that equipment. And, ironically, it might be a case where if the equipment is damaged, given the way technology evolves, maybe you could actually buy more equipment with the same dollar value as the equipment that was damaged. So media and data, that's just another thing to be aware of. Obviously, not only if the computer, the hardware is damaged, but you have to have some value assigned to replacing the software and all the data. The final thing just to keep in mind is we're talking about the EDP policy, which is there to protect your tech assets. And let's keep that separate from cyber liability. That type of insurance coverage is available, and that will protect you if somehow you are storing data, say customer financial information or customer health records, and someone hacks into your computer system, your network, and breaches that data, takes that data. A cyber liability policy is there to protect you if, say, a customer claims against you because their data was stolen from the customer's system. So that could be a whole other webinar, but we just wanted to clarify we're talking about EDP to protect your computer assets versus the cyber liability policy to protect you if somebody sues you because your computer system somehow harmed them.
Great, really good stuff, guys. I learned a couple of things as well, which is always the point of these things. So great, we kind of got to the point of questions and answers now. If you have any late-breaking questions, go ahead and chat them in. We do have a couple here. The first one I got was, what about what about the phone systems? What do I do about my phone systems? That's a really good question. With the HEFI folks, we really weren't involved in the phones, but I can give you an example from our own organization. We have our phone service through Cox, and you would have to check with your provider if this is available, but it can make sense to check and see what's available ahead of time. If you folks remember the big snowstorm back a couple months ago here where really kind of almost the entire city shut down, and then it ended up not snowing near as much as we thought, but we actually made the decision the day before to close our organization. But because our clients rely on us for support, just because we closed our building doesn't mean we weren't available for our clients. We actually we're set up through Cox where we can reroute our phone number to any other phone. So in this case, we rerouted it to a cell phone that we had an employee responsible for answering, taking the request from the client, and then routing it via our electronic systems where we had other employees working from home to deal with that. And we actually got set up where we could go to a web page that Cox manages and adjust that on the fly. So within 2 minutes, I can reroute our phone number to any other device. So that would again be dependent on the phone technology that you have. So it might make sense ahead of time to check with your provider, whether it's Cox or Windstream or Quest or any of those, or CenturyLink, I should say now, any of those organizations to see what they can do in the case of a disaster. We have a number of people asking about the recording. We are recording this, and we're going to have it on our website at pltechnology.com. We'll also have a link in the email on how to access that comes out after the presentation is over. And if anybody would like a copy of the slides or anything, feel free to email me, and we'll get a copy of those to you. Okay, we do have an upcoming webinar that we think you might be interested in. Our next Technology event is using a password manager to never forget another password. So we all probably have dozens of passwords that we try to remember, and some sites make us change them. So we either resort to writing them down, which is not very secure, or using the same password all over and over and over again, which is also not secure. So we're going to show you how a simple piece of software can keep your passwords organized and secure, and really make it easier for you to use. So this is something I've demoed before, and it's been very popular. We've never done a webinar on it. That's going to be at June 9th, 2016 at 10 a.m. So to register, just go to pltechnology.com/events, and you can register for the webinar there. The final thing we have is we want to let everyone know of our upcoming user conference. It's not until November 15th. We had almost 180 people at this last year, where we had focus sessions for executives on technology and the use of technology, and also training for frontline staff on popular software products like Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and other applications that allow them to be more productive with more training on that. So we're still in early bird pricing. If you go to pltechnology.com/conference, we've got half off tickets that we'll probably leave there through the end of March, and then they'll go to full price at that point. So we would love to have you there. Really great value for the cost of that. So at this point, we'll go ahead. We're right at a half an hour, like we had said. We want to thank Bill and Dan for joining us today. Really enjoyed having you on the conference, and thank everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Drew.